The most important thing to do when you're looking at an unseen poem is to read it properly through once so that you know you have the narrative of the poem. So we're going to read The Last Laugh by Wilfred Owen. "Oh, Jesus Christ, I'm hit," he said, and died. Whether he vainly cursed or prayed indeed, the bullets chirped in vain, vain, vain. The machine guns chuckled, tut tut, tut tut, and the big gun guffawed. Another sighed, "Oh, mother, mother, dad," then smiled at nothing, childlike, being dead. And the lofty shrapnel cloud leisurely gestured, "Fool," and the falling splinters tittered. "My love," one moaned, love languid seemed his mood, till slowly lowered his whole face kissed the mud. And the bayonet's long teeth grinned, rabbles of shells hooted and groaned, and the gas hissed. So there's an awful lot of imagery in this poem, and when you analyse an unseen poem on your own, what I'd like you to think about is that you need to remember to smile because you are reading poetry. So you need to look at the structure, the mood, the shape, sorry, the mood, the imagery that is used in the poem, the language, and the effectiveness of the poem in delivering the poet's message overall. If you look at the resources on Google Classroom, you'll also find a resource that's called Inspiration Station, and it will be able to help you in analysing your unseen poetry. So do print it off and use it, and it will tell you how to use that particular structure. So we can see that this poem is in one long stanza, and the shape of it is much like the shape that we would expect of smoke, maybe rising from a gun, or shells, or possibly gas, as we know that we are talking about the trenches. So after an initial look at the outline of the poem, and we know that it's in one stanza, you can see the reported speech of a soldier, he said, and died. So we know that this poem is from a narrator's point of view. So we wonder if maybe these are instances that Owen witnessed and has recorded. Maybe the narrator is another character that is looking around him at his colleagues, at his comrades in his regiment as they're being attacked. So that's something to think about. So we've talked about the structure and the shape, and I think when you're talking about the mood, it's really important to pair the mood with the language and the imagery. So what I would suggest is we go through and look at the language and the imagery that the language creates first, in order to make a better informed decision about the mood. So if we go through line by line, we can see speech, we can see religious language, we can see the use of an exclamation mark calling for help, possibly. And then the use of the semicolon emphasises the end stopped main clause. And died, which of course has connotations of the end of life. And we know that the soldiers were promised dignity and glory, and there is very clearly a lack of heroism celebrated. He just dies, and that's an end to it. So it's very sudden, and we see that this line is end stopped, and the punctuation here represents not only the end of the sentence but the end of the soldier's life also. We look in the second line, whether he vainly cursed or prayed indeed. So we still have those religious links. So one has connotations of anger and one piety. Whether you're religious or not, we all meet the same end, because the adverb vainly shows there's no escape. And we see that in the enjambed line, and that's emphasised. So already we've got an awful lot to say about the language that's used. Notice the personification of bullets. And here this verb shows them to be like birds. So we know that they're plural, and we know that they're making a singing collective. Noise, and the hyphen shows this is what the bullets are singing, and the repetition of vain and the exclamation mark is mocking the dead soldier who called out for Jesus Christ and has just died. We also hear the repetition of the repetition of the V in vain, 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 and that's what we hear. And as sound imagery, is that what the narrator hears? Possibly, as he's in the battlefield as well. Is that the sound that the bullets are making as they fly over his head? And once again, if we move down, the machine guns chuckled, and again the use of proper noun shows the personification. The verb shows happiness. If we look at the hyphen, again this is the noise that it is making. The repetition tut 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 is onomatopoeic. And it shows a different sound of the weaponry firing. The repetition of the T is consonants. So we get a real sense of t-t-t-t-t-t as the machine guns are firing. It sounds as if they're laughing. So you get a sense of joy and amusement in that verb. Again, we see personification in the big gun, and the adjective shows the kind of sound that we can expect, and guffaw is like stifled laughter. So there's a building and a layering of the different sounds, the joyous personification of the weapons are making in cutting down this poor soldier, this poor he. We then move on and we see another casualty, another, and notice there's no identity. In another, there's no name, there's no familiarity, so we get a sense of the magnitude of the loss. And to sigh, that verb, shows a resignation almost. He's almost expecting it, whereas the initial soldier who dies, we see almost a dread and surprise in the fact that he's been struck down. And we see what's important here, the repetition of mother. We see he's quite childlike, calling for his parents. It shows how young the soldiers were and creates pathos. Makes the reader feel sad, and the exclamation marks show the strength of the emotion that he feels, coupled with that repetition of assonance. The O in O, mother, on the second mother there. And then we see a really upsetting line, then smiled at nothing, again the repetition of the O, childlike being dead. So we've got that simile, which again stresses the youth of the numbers. And this is quite an interesting line, because smile, obviously it's past tense, smiled has connotations of happiness, and nothing suggests again quite a final suggestion of the pointlessness of his death. And of course the present tense, the shift, being dead, is nothing. So we get a sense of the innocence of children and ignorance, Does he not know what it is to die? Does he not realise? Did he think it was a game? If so, there's an end to it. And we see the reaction in the weaponry and the ammunition again. And the lofty, so high up, adjective, shrapnel cloud. This is injarmed, possibly to link to the shape of the poem. Leisurely gestured, full. So we see in the hyphen the reaction. The exclamation mark shows the contempt. And the loftiness of the shrapnel cloud. Again, the shrapnel cloud is personified. Could it be the officers who don't have to suffer the same fates? We're not sure. There's a suggestion that that is the case, the people who are actually in control of the war, because leisure is associated with enjoyment, having fun, hobbies. And this gesture is a movement to show the example of how this other soldier has appeared as a fool. So you get a real sense of the fact that these poor men mean absolutely nothing, and there is a sense of farce. There's a slapstick comedy that is seen in connection with these leisurely figures. That adverb is really important. And the falling splinters, those that come from the shrapnel, tittered, which again is laughter. So we get a sense that the shrapnel has started to rain down and have a wider effect. It covers a larger surface area in the splinters. My love, one moaned. So we see the third soldier dying, and he's thinking of his romance. And they were his last words. The repetition of that L sound, that alliteration. That is continued onto the next line. Actually draws out the pace. And that extended all. And languid is to be sad and to miss his girlfriend, his partner. One assumes it is a romantic relationship. I don't know if it's a girlfriend. My love, one moaned, love languid seemed his mood, till slowly lowered his whole face, kissed the mud. So this kissing the mud is a pun. You've got that semantic field. Of relationships. And the only relationship he has, of course, is with the earth. Death. Decay. the idea that there's nothing between his lips and his grave, so he doesn't even have a coffin or anything like that. And the bayonet's long teeth, which is imagery for the knives on the ends of guns. That's what bayonets are. The blades on the ends of the rifles grinned, so you get this image of kind of flashing a smile, and glinting white teeth, linked to the light bouncing off of the blades on the end of the rifles that the soldiers carried. The last two lines, you've got intro rhyme. In the line GR GR NED NED, and that really shows the contrast in the connotations of happiness and pain. So the happiness of the ammunition and the pain of the dying soldiers. This colloquialism, almost rabbles of shells, is a metaphor. So a crowd, but an unruly one, like an angry, unsophisticated mob. Rabbles of shells, shells again being the bombs that came from the cannons, which we hear about hooting again with the sound imagery that we saw in Dulce de Cormes. You've got that recollection of that sound there. The shells hooted and groaned, so you hear the sound of the shells being shot rising up. So we've got that sensory, and then the groaning is them coming back down to earth and impacting. The descent and the impact, so they come together, so the conjunction joins the two sounds. But hooted also is laughter, like one short, well not short, but a burst of laughter. If something was described as a hoot, it would be fun, amusing. And the gas hissed. So you have the personification of gas, you have sibilance, which creates the onomatopoeia, and it sounds like the last thing that is that's coming for the narrator. So the narrator is in danger, we fear, because the use of that verb has connotations of warning, being bitten, and as we know, being bitten by a snake is particularly a venomous one, is very dangerous. It's very painful, and unless there is an antidote for it, which as we know there wasn't for the gas, then it would result in death. So there is an awful lot, if we look back at what we decided to look at in terms of language. There's an awful lot of personification, there's an awful lot of onomatopoeia, there's an awful lot of enchantment, which we can link to the structure. And the mood describes the mood of the ammunition and also the mood of the soldiers. So the semantic field of chuckling, chirping, smiling, tittering, grinning and hooting contrasts with the soldiers' initial reaction, cursing, sighing, moaning and groaning, and finally love language, which is the sound created is one of longing and is one of being heartbroken, which is certainly what we can see in Owen here. So that's an awful lot of annotations for the structure, the shape, the mood. The imagery that we have created is in the personification, and we get a sense that the ammunition is mocking and enjoying the slaughter of the soldiers. We've talked about the language devices, and I'm going to leave it up to you to decide how effective it is in establishing Owen's message. And when you do that, you need to look back up at the title of the poem. We see alliteration and the rhyme of last and laugh in the title of the poem, and that is echoed below in the love languid. So that gives us a sense of foreboding, it gives us a sense of pain and emotional upheaval. Laugh we can associate with happiness, amusement, but the phrase, the last laugh, is to be the winner, the victor. So that even if the soldiers feel as if they are winning, the last laugh, ultimately in their death, belongs to the guns and the shells and the shrapnel and the bayonets and the gas, ultimately the gas, that pick off and enjoy, treat the war like a game, pick off the soldiers and enjoy their very emotional last dying moments. And that contributes largely to how effective the poem is, because we get a sense, a very strong and clear sense, of why Owen chooses to personify the ammunition and the ironmongery of the weapons, and we get a really strong sense of how we are supposed to feel on behalf of the three characters who died, and for the narrator, who is still in that very dangerous, precarious position as he looks around and sees his comrades die. What I'd like you to do is, I would like you to write a sentence about what you think Owen is trying to achieve in his message. I'd like you to think about his intended audience, his message in another sentence, and your final sentence, is it effective? And I'd like you to bring your annotated copies to the next lesson, please.